Welcome to AP Environmental Science. In this video, we are going to discuss eutrophication. Now, eutrophication is the result of excess nutrients in the waterways. And if this excess nutrients is coming from anthropogenic or human sources, we call that cultural eutrophication. Now, these excess nutrients can come from extra fertilizers in farm fields. They can come from sewage from wastewater treatment plants, could also come from nitrogen from animal manure, and phosphates from detergents or laundry soap. Now, this diagram gives a good overview of how eutrophication progresses, and you will want to write down these steps into your notes. Now, step number 1 is that excess nutrients being added to the waterway. And as a result of this excess nutrients, the plants are going to flourish and grow quickly. But that's also going to lead to step 3, where algae is going to start growing as well. But the problem here is that the algae grows on the surface of the water and not down at the bottom. And when you have a lot of algae across the surface, that prevents the sunlight from penetrating down to the bottom of the water body where the normal plants are going to live. As a result, this means that those plants along the bottom are not getting enough sunlight to do photosynthesis, and those are going to die and start to decompose. Also, because they're not doing as much photosynthesis, those plants underneath are not going to be adding as much oxygen into the water. Now, this is something that gets a little confusing for some students because that algae across the surface does do photosynthesis, but it is not that main contributor to oxygen in that particular ecosystem. Now, as those plants start to die and decompose, eventually that is going to lead to the using of all of that dissolved oxygen from those decomposers. Those algae are going to quickly run out of nutrients once that nutrient load diminishes, and they will also die and decompose and use up all of that oxygen. And because there is not very much oxygen left in that ecosystem, that will lead to the death of the ecosystem, and there will be massive die-offs of fish and other organisms. Now remember, there are a few different stages of a body of water. You can have a eutrophic body of water that has high levels of nutrients, typically has large algae populations, and very low dissolved oxygen. We can have a mesotrophic body of water. It's kind of that neutral or medium level of nutrients. It's your typical healthy lake environment. And then, of course, there is oligotrophic lakes, which have very little nutrients, but they have pretty stable populations of algae, and they have high levels of dissolved oxygen. Now, normally, when eutrophication happens, over the natural processes, it takes a very long time to happen, and we're looking at the scale of centuries to go from an oligotrophic to a eutrophic body of water. Now, when humans get involved and add in extra nutrients, we call that cultural eutrophication, and that can progress a lake from oligotrophic to eutrophic much faster, and in this case, it would be in the scale of decades. Now remember, we've talked about hypoxic waterways when we were talking about the Gulf of Mexico dead zone. Remember, hypo means low, and oxic is referring to oxygen. So a hypoxic waterway is going to have low levels of dissolved oxygen. We've also talked about oxygen sag curves and how the BOD influences the amount of dissolved oxygen. Now, this is again a result of eutrophication and can create these ocean dead zones. Now, in summary, you should be able to explain the environmental effects or consequence of the excess use of fertilizers and detergents on aquatic ecosystems. Essentially, these things lead to eutrophication. You should be able to describe the difference between eutrophic and oligotrophic waterways and how hypoxic waterways can become dead zones. Please leave me your questions here at the end, and I hope that as you watch this video, you were able to learn something.